Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. Okay, we are on the bottom of Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, the last few lines over here. We've been discussing a couple of psukim and shir hashirim as they allude to the Torah. So 21b3, Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, all the way on the bottom. Kivutzosav taltalim. His locks are wavy. Where do we see those words, by the way? Kivutzosav taltalim. Where are those words incorporated? On his miros, that's right. On his miros, we incorporate the fact that these words, his locks are wavy, as a reference to Hashem, but in this context, they're understood to be a reference to the Torah. Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Mar Ukva, Melamed, Sheyesh Lidrosh, Al Kol Kotes, V'Kotes, Tilim Shel Halachos. So the word kivutzosav, which is locks, also could mean a kotes. A kotes is a single point, a little, and there's this, and if you look at in a Torah scroll, you'll notice that a couple of letters have crowns, and sometimes they do have crowns. Whatever. Bottom line is they have their crowns on certain letters, and tilim means piles and piles, or heaps and heaps. There's a famous Gemara which speaks about Moshe going into the future, or gazing into the future, and seeing Rabbi Akiva darshaning to his students about these different little things, and Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't understand what was going on. He was like overwhelmed. He was like deflated. He's like, what's happening? I don't understand what's flying. And Hashem, whatever, bottom line, Hashem comforted him. But the point is that he was darshaning the little points, these little crowns on the letter. He was teaching halachos from them. He was teaching ideas from them. And that's the idea that every single thing in the Torah, sometimes we learn things from a space in the Torah as opposed to even words, right? And that's what's being emphasized over here, that his locks are that kol kotes v'kotes tile tilim, that on every little tiny point there are heaps and heaps of laws that could be learned. Okay. Shchoros ka'orev. The Gemara, the pasuk continues and says that it is black, or he is black as a raven. So what does this mean? We're going to see three different opinions in terms of how committed a person has to be when it comes to learning Torah, and we'll see three different opinions. So, b'miyat hamotzan, who do you find a person who is a Talmid Chacham? Where do you find a person who has real Torah scholarship? So, there are three versions based on this pasuk. So again, black as a raven. So, for opinion number one, b'mi, now we're on Chaf Beis Amud Aleph 22a1, shemashkim umariv alem leveis hamedrash, who comes early and stays late in the Beis Medrash to learn Torah. Right. So the word shachar over here is from the word getting up early. Dark could be just the light is there is no light outside, so you come here, you have a chance of being a scholar because you're coming early when it's still dark. Again, imagine you're learning all late at night. But the point is that there is a person who learns when it's dark, early and late, they are going to be a scholar. Rabba Amar b'misha mashcher panav aleim ka'orev. He says, he takes a step further. He says it's someone who his face is blackened from the exhaustion of studying, right? So he's saying it's not just enough to be early or late. Like you have to completely wear yourself out. I think I've shared with you in the past, like watching Nosson Zvi Finkel, who had Parkinson's, teaching Torah to the point that he literally could not go on anymore. That's what he's referring to. Like you're drained, so drained, we're pushing. That's the level. Okay. Also amazing. Rava takes it a step further. You're not going to like this approach, but Rava says no. It's even more than that. Rava Amar b'misha mesim atzma achzari abana v'bnei veso ka'orev. There is a tradition that a raven doesn't have a relationship with its children. So the only person who's able to really succeed is someone who makes themselves cruel like a raven to their own children. Ki had Rav Ada bar Masna, a story to exemplify this with Rav Ada bar Masna. Rav, he was on his way to study Torah in a Beis Medrash. Keep in mind, many of the people would travel from one country to another to go learn. They wouldn't just go to the local Beis Medrash. They would travel. People in Bavel would go to Israel. People in Israel would go to Bavel. And Amr Le'Ledvisu, his wife said to him, "Yenuke didach maya avilahu." No one's supporting us. There wasn't there were no one bought the Madeira and blah blah blah. They had nothing. Who's going to support your children? Amr La mishlimu kurme ba'agma. Are there no more wild vegetables in the marsh? Ends of discussion. Okay, so three different opinions over here. I'm not recommending this last one, but you do have a responsibility certainly as a man to support wife and child. It's in your man's ketubah. But the bottom line is what Rav is trying to highlight is that unless a person really, really goes to the extreme, they're not really going to be able to accomplish in Torah scholarship. Okay, obviously there's more to discuss with this statement of Rava. Let's go further. Okay, umishalim lesonav el panav la'avido. Okay, now we have a discussion. If you recall, we earlier in the Gemara it said yesterday discussed the fact that unless a person has Torah Shabbat Peh, they don't understand justice in this world. Okay, that was what the Gemara. So we're going to begin this story with a pasuk. Pasuk says, pasuk says in Dvarim, Umisham l'sonav al panav la'avido, that Hashem, he repays those that hate him to his face to destroy him. Okay? Amr Yeshua ben Levi. Had the pasuk not said this, it would have been impossible to say. And he's going to interpret this verse a little bit differently. That Hashem, when it comes to repaying those who are evil, it's like he has something on his face. You have something on your face, what do? You want to get it off. It's uncomfortable. So when Hashem needs to repay the Risham, it's like something on his face, meaning, he wants to cast it off. So what this means is that Hashem goes ahead, when it comes to a Rasha who does good deeds, there's justice in the world. And a Rasha who does good deeds has to be paid back for his good deeds. However, as we're about to see, when it comes to a tzaddik, Hashem has patience. Hashem says, okay, I'm not going to pay back in this world. It's not worth it for you oftentimes in this world. I rather wait, I rather pay back in the next world. But a Rasha, it's like there's something on Hashem's face. Hashem immediately pays the Rasha back. So often we see those who are evil prosper. Yeah, it's like Hashem has this thing on his face. I need to just pay the person back because I want them to be paid back in this world, because the real justice would indicate that they should not get reward in the world to come, right? If you had to pick where to get reward, the reward in the world of this world does not in any way compare to the reward of the world to come, and yet we need justice, and therefore the Rasha does need to get paid back. Hashem pushes it off his face, meaning he pays him back immediately. Okay? Says the pasuk continues, he does not delay payment to those who hate him. Hashem does not delay good payment for those who hate him. In other words, for those who hate him, Hashem pays them back right away. But Hashem does delay payment for the totally righteous. In other words, the totally righteous merit again. We see from our limited perspective an upside down world, but the Gemara has explained, our tradition basically lays it out very clearly, and that is those who are righteous, Hashem delays their payment back because, again, your ideal world, if you were really stuck to it, if someone said, hey, bottom line is you have the most blissful olam haba, or a blissful olam hazeh, we'd be fools, and again, it's hard, let's be honest, it's hard, but we'd be fools to choose this world. We'd be fools. The absolute fools. Okay. This Rabbi Shimon Levi said, the pasuk says, I'm commanding you to do them today. There's two things we learn from this pasuk. One is One is we're only able to accomplish today, meaning in this world. Once we get to the next world, it's over. There's no more chance to accomplish. And further, today we do, but this world is a world of doing. The world to come is a world of receiving. There's not a world of receiving. We're not hardwired, just psychologically. It's hard for us to, be on the receiving end. How long can a person sit on the beach and just enjoy themselves? A person is not hardwired. A healthy person wants to accomplish. That's because we're hardwired for that. In the next world, we're hardwired differently, and that's a world of reward. This is a world hayom lasosam. This is a world of activity. This is a world to accomplish. We do. And the next world is where we focus on reward. Okay? Amar Chagai, V'temer of Shmuel bar Nachmani, Ma'adichsiv, Erech Apayim. Why is it? It's a slow to anger. Hashem is slow to anger. Erech Af mibayile. The term should be Erech Af, which is in the singular. Apayim is in the plural. Why is that? Ella erech hapayim letzadikim, erech hapayim l'risham. Hashem is slow for the tzadikim, and he's slow for the risham. So what does that mean? He's slow in giving goodness, giving reward to the tzadikim, and he is slow in giving punishment for the Risham, right? In both cases, there's a delay, and that's why there's the plural, that there are different things that are delayed. For the tzaddik, Hashem delays the reward, and for Rasha, Hashem delays the punishment, and as we spoke about before. Okay, that's the end of Agadata for now. Let's get back to our Gemara. Very important, before we see the next discussion, if you recall, we had a machlokas in the Mishnah about how much space you're able to have around this pit. And one opinion said Beis Hasayim. Okay, Beis Hasayim is about 992 yards. Okay, whatever that is. But basically, it's not such a huge space. It's like half a mile, I believe. It's not huge. And Rabbi Yehuda said that's the amount of space you have. The Chum said even more. Rabbi Yehuda's concern, Rabbi Yehuda's whole discussion idea was coming from a halacha that is very, very, very relevant in Eruv, and that is something called a karpef. We've seen that term before. A karpef is basically not uninhabitable, but a non-inhabitable space. If you have a non-inhabitable space, then that is not a place which could be in an Eruv. Okay, why? Because since you can't, a non-inhabitable space is not seen as a living space, and therefore you can't make an Eruv with such a space. And whenever you have a permitted space immediately adjacent to a non-inhabited space, or a place where you can't have an Eruv, it disqualifies the whole Eruv place, okay? This comes up all the time in so many Eruvim. Why? Because how do we define an uninhabitable or non-inhabitable space? Okay, so for example, is a cemetery a non-inhabitable space? Most people do not live in cemeteries, right? Is a golf course, forget a golf course, the golf course it doesn't mean people have to live there, but people it's usage, right? But let's say those big sand spaces, there's a word for it. I knew you'd get that one. Okay, so a sand trap in a golf cart, in a golf course. If they're very large, again, a half mile is okay. It's big, but or you have a whole little forest area or garden, right? Which is meant for. And in Israel, this comes up the most because in Israel you have lots of rocky terrain, which is not necessarily so well built. And then the question is, if this is in your Eruv, does that ruin the entire Eruv? Right? So that's a whole discussion. What exactly? How do you define these places? And will it ruin the whole Eruv? There are a lot of Eruvim which try to build around these places. Sometimes it's very hard. It makes it even more complicated.
There was an issue when they built the Eruv here because I think there were farms still in those days.
Interesting. Okay, so if it's a farm that has a house attached to it, it's not going to be a problem. But if it's standalone, it's going to be a real issue. Rav Heinemann actually, I believe, is one of the more lenient views. Again, extensive. It comes up in so many different Eruvin, but that's the idea of a karpef. Just.
Something to do with water, because I was looking at our map, and the water is not in the Eruv. Or is that something different?
So we're going to come back to water. Water has its own discussion. We'll come back. Hopefully we'll have time today with a lot of relevant halachos to touch upon. But bottom line is, this karpef is an area which is not acceptable, and that's going to be part of the backdrop to Rav Yehuda's opinion. So with that, let's jump in. Rav Yehuda Omer ad beis hasayim. Rav Yehuda says the area around the well, right, the well that we've been talking about until now, with the pasei birios, right, the four-cornered L, the L's at the corner. He says the space you have only up to 2 beisa. Ibailu, the Gemara asks, very detailed question. Bar upasin ka'amar. Odilma bar velo passing amar. When Rav Yehuda said that you could have up to 2 beisa, was he referring to all the space, including the space immediately around the well, or was it the 2 beisa plus the immediate area around the well? Right? How much areas are around the well? If you remember what this all looked like, ignore all the other lines. But we said there's enough for what? For a cow to be there, right? So we want a beisa plus this, the few amos over here, or does this include the beisa? Okay, so the question is really a question of 2 feet, essentially. Okay, right? In other words, Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda said that you could extend these sticks all the way out to 2 beisa, right? To beis hasayim. And the Gemara is asking, when he said that, was that included was that this bit, right? 2 beisa, and this whole thing is. This whole space, right, and this is 2 beisa, or in addition to the amount of space you would need to be able to build, right? So in other words, let's say what you would have it close by, the immediate measurements would be, 2 feet, around 2 feet around the thing. So is it 2 beisa alone, or is it 2 beisa plus 2 feet? Because this is the minimal measurement. Okay, so it's a question of 2 feet, right? You with me on the question? Okay, so it says the Gemara. Adam, the Gemara asks. The Gemara explains the question. Adam nosin in a bevoro. When a person, focuses on when a person looks at the thing in front of them, do they focus entirely on the pits? And we're not afraid that a person is going to mix this case up and say, oh look, you have an empty space, which is not really a living space, and a person may go ahead and think that a karpef is okay, and a karpef can't be more than 2 beisa, because this also is like a place which is quasi nirshus harabim. It's not really an habitable place. You have the well over here, and therefore a person is going to go ahead and mix this up with a karpef. Odilma adam nosin ena b'mechitzaso v'gazrin dilma asla chlufe yosem basis time b'karpef. And or do we say that since a person is looking at these measurements and they say, okay, well, I know this measurement is more than 2 beisa, okay, by a little bit, and therefore I'm going to go ahead and think that I'm allowed to also have a karpef which is more than 2 beisa. Right? That's the Gemara's question. Okay? So it says the Gemara, Tashma, Kama Hein Mikoravin. How close must these double posts be? So the Gemara begins, Kedei Rosha, the Bryce begins, Kedei Rosha V'Rishal Para. It has to be large enough for the head and most of the body of a cow. The Kama Hein Ruchakin. How large could they be if you want to extend them? How far could they go? So the Tanakama says, Afilu Kar, Afilu Karaim, even 1 car, even 2 cars, a very large area. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he's the one we were asking about. Beis hasayim mutter. If it's 2 beisa, it's allowed. Yosem beis hasayim aser. If it's more than 2 beisa, it's forbidden. And now let's keep on reading because it's really the later opinion that's going to clarify what Rabbi Yehuda meant. Amru Rabbi Yehuda, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, Yatzamoda bedir v'sara muktzeh v'chatzer. Don't you agree in a case of a fold, a corral, a back lot, or a courtyard? Afilu beis chameshes karm beis aseres karm shemuter. You agree that there are places where you have these partitions, and we allow it to extend so much larger than 2 beisa. Why all of a sudden you scared? What kind of question is this? In those cases, in a backyard, you have walls around it. Yes, when they're full-fledged walls, we're going to be much more lenient in terms of how much space. But over here, you have these small little things. We're going to be much more limited. We're going to be afraid people are going to mix it up with other things, and therefore we're going to be more strict. Here's the key. Rav Shimon Elazar Omer, the third opinion in this brisa, bor beis hasayim, a beis hasayim mutter. Okay? And he says a water hole, this whole space, which measures 2 beisa by 2 beisa. Okay? V'lo amru laharchik el gdei rosh v'ruba shel para, and they did not permit distancing beyond 2 beisa, except enough to accommodate the head and most of the body of a cow. In other words, he's saying that you could have even a pit which is 2 beisa by 2 beisa, okay, full measurements, plus the extra 2 feet for the cow. Right? So what Rav Shimon Elazar is of which opinion? He's of the opinion it's 2 Beisa plus the 2 feet. Right? Says the Gemara. The fact that Rav Shimon Elazar allows 2 Beisa plus the area around the posts, that we could infer from there that Rabbi Yehuda, when he said Barapasan, he meant not including the extra posts. Right, now that we have Rav Shimon Elazar's view, where he says explicitly that you have 2 Beisa, you can have a well that's 2 Beisa, huge well, right? Forget our last story. But now, according to this version, you have a 2 Beisa well, right? And then he says, and you can have 2 feet, right? So according to Rav Shimon Elazar, he's clearly saying 2 Beisa plus the 2 feet. If Rabbi Yehuda is in that same price and he's arguing, then he must hold less than that, because he also says 2 Beisa must be, without him clarifying, we can infer from Rav Shimon Elazar saying 2 Beisa plus 2 feet that Rabbi Yehuda holds just 2 Beisa. Okay, says the Gemara. No, Velohi Rabbi Yehuda Barba below passing. Rabbi Yehuda says no. It's also 2 Beisa in addition to the 2 feet. Ihachi Hainu Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Okay, but then he would seem to be seemingly saying the same thing as Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Igivenayu Arech V'Katin. What they're arguing about is, are you allowed to have it rectangular as opposed to square? If you listen closely, Rav Shimon Elazar said bar beisa sayim a beisa sayim. He said 2 Beisa by 2 Beisa. Now he actually did not mean that you're allowed to have it 2 Beisa, by 2 Beisa. But what he meant is that it should be equal distant. That you basically should have a square. So Rav Shimon Elazar is saying that Beisa have to be a square. Okay, and Rabbi Yehuda is coming along and saying, no, as long as you have the space of Beisa, 2 Beisa, then you're fine. It doesn't actually have to be a square. But they both agree that it's going to be base. In other words, you can't necessarily infer from this brisa that, yes, it's true. Rabbi Shimon Elazar and Rabbi Yehuda definitely disagree. But what do they disagree about? We assume they disagree about those 2 feet. Now we're pointing out, no, if you look closely at Rabbi Shimon Elazar's verbiage, he's talking about a square. So it could be what they're arguing about is not about, do you have the extra 2 feet? They could both agree to that. What they're arguing about is, do you need it to be a square or could it be a rectangle? Okay, and therefore we don't have a definitive statement about whether you have those extra 2 feet or not. Okay, let's go further. Klal Amar of Shimon Elazar, Kol Aver Shetashmichu L'Diro. Any open space which is used for residential purposes, Kigon Dir, V'Sar, Muktzah V'Chatzer, such as a fold, a coral, back lot, or a courtyard. These are all things which people use. Doesn't mean people live there, right? So even a golf course, no one would disagree that a golf course is considered included because people play golf. Right, so you don't have to live there, but is it meant for regular human usage? Okay, there it's you're allowed to carry there even if it doesn't have a full-fledged roof. Any dwelling which is used solely for the sake of open space, like a watchman's hut. Okay, Beisa Sayim Mutter. If it's you have Beisa Sayim up to 2 Beisa is allowed. Yozer Beisa Sayim Aser. More than 2 Sa, you're not going to be even if it's not going to be valid, and that is the case of the Karpef. Okay, let's start the next Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So here we have we're going back to, we're still wrapping up. We're almost done our conversation about these 4-cornered spaces. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Im Haya Derech Rosh Hashanah Mafsaktan Yisal Kenan Stadin. Rabbi Yehuda says, and we saw this before. If you look beyond all these lines, deep down over here, you see this line. Okay. Bottom line is, it's too complicated. You have our pasan case, which we've been talking about until now. Right? You build this thing. You have the well over here, and let's say you have people who are walking through this. Rosh Hashanah is walking through this. Rabbi Yehuda is basically saying it's invalid, and rather we have to do is start putting up street signs and direct traffic. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I got it. What's it called? You have to direct traffic, and thank you for my handy assistant, Scott. You're hired. Bottom line is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to direct traffic around so that they don't walk through these things, because if they walk through it, it would ruin the walls. Okay, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, it's fine. Chacham say no. If you have these 4-cornered things, they can continue walking right through it. It will not ruin the rishus. It will not ruin the walls. It can still be considered a partition space, right? Yeah.
So it's imaginary walls. Then.
They're always been imaginary walls.
Right,
I mean,
so that's why when you say so, you don't, because once they're so you ruin it in people's minds. Is that what
Correct. But you're just saying, yeah, these walls become done with, because as long as you have masses of people walking through it, how do we maintain these imaginary walls? The Chum say no. Imaginary walls are imaginary walls, and they're good walls. I don't care if people walking through it. This is a valid wall. We always perceive it like this, even if people are walking through it. Okay. Yeah. Fine. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Travayu. So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar comment.
Limit on the number of people who could walk through it?
No, even Rabbim would mean 600,000 people could be walking through it. Unlikely in that type of space, but
those are the fights they have in Brooklyn.
It's part of it. It's part of it. Hopefully, we're going to come back to we'll get back to Brooklyn. We're going to talk about other when we get back to Eruvin.
The Dodgers won't.
Very good. Okay. Rav Yochanan, Rav Elazar, Rav Tarvayu, Kanad Yochanan, Kochel Shemachitzos. You see, from the Chacham's view, they say, look how powerful, to Jen's point, and that is that look how powerful these partitions are. Because even though you have the rabbim walking through it, no, once we have these partitions, they're good partitions. You could have 600,000 people racing back and forth, knocking each other over. It doesn't matter. Partitions are partitions. So the Gemara now went first. Kanus Firle. The fact that he says, from here you see, the Gemara initially assumes that means that Rav Yochanan and Rav Elazar actually agree with this view, agree with the view of the Chachamim, that even though you have these people walking through this virtual walls, it's still going to be a good wall. The fact that he's emphasizing it sounds like he holds like it. However, the Gemara says that doesn't add up. Amar Rabba bar Bachan, Rav Yochanan, Yerushalayim. When it comes to the city of Yerushalayim, Il Malad al Sasan and Alos Balayla, were not for the fact that the doors were closed at night, Chayavan la Mishum Sarabim. It would be a full-fledged Mishur Sarabim. Okay, so apparently Yerushalayim, though the streets would be, the main street of Yerushalayim was a full-fledged public domain. Okay, we'll discuss why. We'll come back to this at a later point. But people, you see this, people would be walking through it, and therefore, if it's a full-fledged public domain, Eruvin don't work, right? Remember, Eruvin only work for Dirabanan. So why are you allowed to carry in the city of Yerushalayim, even though it has walls around it? But since the full-fledged public domain, it's only because they close the doors at night. Only because they close the doors at night. That's what made it no longer a public domain. So you see what? You see that even though it has full-fledged walls, the city of Yerushalayim has walls. And yet, because people are walking through it, it upends it. It makes it no longer it ruins the walls, right? In other words, it ruins the ability to be considered walled in because you have the rabbim walking through it. The reason it doesn't is because they close the doors. But had they not closed the door, and even though there are walls, once the rabbim are there, once the masses are there, it kind of overrides it being a private space. Yeah, making sense? So the Gemara says, Ella kan v'losphere le'ya, he does not agree with this view. Okay? In other words, he was just highlighting the Cham's view, but really he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Again, this also plays a big role. There are cities where you have, masses walk through, and we haven't yet really gotten to discussion what's defined as a Rishus Rabbim, or the Rabbim walking through it. But we see even a city like Yerushalayim was considered like the masses are walking through it. And again, if you not had the doors, it would ruin it. So there are places, if you go to Matisdorf, there are doors. There are doors at the edge of Matisdorf, and a whole discussion. Do you have to close the doors? Do you not have to close the doors? They close the doors. Okay, but there are cities, and in Europe they relied on this for some major cities where they had doors, but they couldn't close the doors. Is that valid? Is that enough that the doors, we already alluded to this earlier, is it enough that they could close the doors? I forgot some major cities in Europe, this was a massive discussion, which many were lenient with. But again, you're going to have cities where there are massive people walking through, and that would ruin it unless you had these doors. Okay, maybe we'll try to come back to this discussion sometime soon. Let's finish up the Gemara over here. For Rami Rav Yehuda, Rav Yehuda. Now, the problem is, in this Mishnah, Rav Yehuda said if the masses walk through this space, it's going to be, it's going to ruin it. And the Rabbanan said it doesn't ruin it. But now we have a contradiction between Rav Yehuda here and Rav Yehuda elsewhere. Rami Rabbanan to Rabbanan, and we have a contradiction between the Rabbanan over here and the Rabbanan elsewhere. Tanya, where we have a brisa. Yasva Kenam Rav Yehuda. We keep on quoting this brisa. We've quoted it already here. We've quoted it in Shabbos a few times. Let's say a person has. Thank you, Scott. Let's say a person has. Okay, person has a, let's say, bird's eye view. Bird's eye view, house over here, public domain, this is public, right, public thoroughfare, and they want to carry from their house over here, they want to go through this door to this door. So what they do, Rabbi Yehuda says, you put a lechi over here, you put a lechi over here, whatever, you put a korah over here, let's say you put a korah over here, and now I can walk through it, no problem, right? The Chachamim say, so Rabbi Yehuda says, you put two korahs, two lechis, and you carry in the middle. The Chachamim say, what are you talking about? This is a public domain. You can't go ahead and put a lechi over there. It's not going to override it. So what comes out? Rabbi Yehuda is over here saying that even though the public are walking here, no problem. I have a virtual wall. In our Mishnah, he said a virtual wall, public, ruins it. And the Chachamim, who over here are telling us that no, you can't do this. The public are walking through it. In our Mishnah said the public will walk through the pasin. What's the difference? So Kasha Rav Yehuda, Kasha Rabbanan, Rabbanan, right? Contradiction. Rav Yehuda, Kasha. Contradiction. Rav Yehuda is not an issue. Rav Yehuda holds that to be a public domain, you need two walls. As long as you have two walls, it's a full-fledged public domain, and therefore to have two walls makes it a private domain, makes it Rishus Yachid, and therefore in this case you have two walls. Once you have two real walls, you already have a private domain. Whereas in our Mishnah, over here, you have those pasin, you have those corner things. That's not a good wall. Not a contradiction. It's true they are small, but at the end of the day, you have four quasi walls because you have an amma going in each direction. Each L is like a wall, so you have four walls. There, you only have two real walls, and you have a lechi, or a korah. But you don't have the 4 walls that we're looking for, and therefore it's not really contradictory. They both agree when something is an inferior subpart type of wall, partition, then the Rambam could get through it. The question is, how do you define that? Rabbi Yehuda defines that as our case, where you have just the 4 corners, and the Rabbanan define it as a case where you just have 2 walls. Okay, we'll pick up tomorrow. Have a great day.